Anatomy. Anatomy, a subfield of biology, is the study of the structure of living things. There are three main areas of anatomy. Cytology studies the structure of cells. Histology examines the structure of tissues. And gross anatomy deals with organs and organ groupings called systems. Comparative anatomy, which strives to identify general structural patterns in families of plants and animals, provided the basis for the classification of species. Human anatomy is a crucial element of the modern medical curriculum. History of the human anatomy body. The Flemish scientist Andreas Vesalius, 1514 to 1564, founded modern anatomy, a branch of Western science, with the publication of De Humani Corporis Fabrica, Structure of the Human Body, in 1543. In addition to correcting numerous misconceptions about the human body, Vesalius's book was the first description of human anatomy that organized the organs into systems. Although initially rejected by many followers of classical anatomical doctrines, Vesalius's systematic conception of anatomy soon became the foundation of anatomical research and education throughout the world. Anatomists still use his systematic approach. Human anatomy. Human anatomy divides the body into the following distinct functional systems: cutaneous, muscular, skeletal, circulatory, nervous, digestive, urinary, endocrine, respiratory, and reproductive. This division helps the student understand the organs, their relationships, and the relations of individual organs to the body as a whole. The cutaneous system consists of the integument, the covering of the body, including the skin, hair, and nails. The skin is the largest organ in the body, and its most important function is to act as a barrier between the body and the outside world. The skin's minute openings, pores, also provide an outlet for sweat, which regulates the body temperature. The skin is protected from sunburn by melanin, a dark pigment found in the skin. The skin also contains oil-producing cells. The muscles of the muscular system enable the body to move and provide power to the hands and fingers. There are two basic types of muscles. Voluntary, skeletal, muscles enable movements under conscious direction, e.g., to walk, move an arm, or smile. Involuntary, smooth, muscles are not consciously controlled and operate independently of conscious direction. For example, they play an important role in digestion. The third type of muscle, cardiac muscle, is involuntary but also striated, as in skeletal muscles. Because cardiac muscle is self-contractile, it allows the heart to pump blood throughout the body without pause, from early in embryogenesis to death. The skeletal system, or skeleton, is the general supportive structure of the body. In addition, the skeletal system is the site of many important and complex physiological and immunological processes. The skeletal frame provides the support that muscles need in order to function. Of the 206 bones in the human body, the largest is the femur, or thigh bone. The smallest are the tiny ear ossicles, 3 in each ear, named the hammer, malleus, anvil, incus, and stirrup, stapes. Often included in the skeletal system are the ligaments, which connect bone to bone, the joints, which allow the connected bones to move, and the tendons, which connect muscle to bone. The circulatory system comprises the heart, arteries, veins, capillaries, blood and blood-forming organs, and the lymphatic subsystem. The 4 chambers of the heart allow the heart to act as a dual pump to propel blood to the lungs for oxygenation, the pulmonary system, and to pump blood throughout the body, systemic circulation. From the heart, the blood circulates through the arteries. The blood is distributed through smaller and smaller tubes until it passes into the microscopic capillaries, which bathe every cell. The veins collect the used blood from the capillaries and return it to the heart. The nervous system consists of the brain, the spinal cord, and the sensory organs that provide information to them. For example, our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin receive stimuli and send signals that travel both electrically and chemically to the brain. The brain is an intricate system of complicated neurons, nerve cells, that allow us to process sensory information, visceral signals, e.g., regulating breathing, body temperature, etc., and perform cognitive thought. The digestive system is essentially a long tube extending from the mouth to the anus. The stomach, small intestine, and large intestine conduct food entering the mouth, while accessory organs contribute digestive juices to break down the food and extract the molecules that can be used to nourish the body. The unusable parts of the ingested food are expelled through the anus as fecal matter. The salivary glands, in the mouth, the liver, and the pancreas are the primary digestive glands. The urinary system consists of the kidneys, the bladder, and the connecting tubules. The kidneys filter water and waste products from the blood and pass them into the bladder. The urinary tract empties the bladder at intervals, ridding the body of unneeded waste. The endocrine system consists of ductless endocrine glands that produce hormones that regulate various bodily functions. The pancreas secretes insulin to regulate sugar metabolism, for example. The pituitary gland in the brain is the principal or master gland that regulates many other glands and endocrine functions. The respiratory system includes the lungs, the diaphragm, and the tubes that connect them to the outside atmosphere. Respiration is the process by which an organism absorbs oxygen from the air and returns carbon dioxide. The diaphragm is the muscle that enables the lungs to work. Finally, the reproductive system enables sperm and egg to unite and the egg to remain in the uterus or womb to develop into a functional human. Anatomical nomenclature. Over the centuries, anatomists developed a standard nomenclature, or method of naming anatomical structures. Terms such as up or down obviously have no meaning unless the orientation of the body is clear. When a body is lying on its back, the thorax and abdomen are at the same level. When a body is lying on its back, the orientation of up and down is no longer perceived. Anatomical studies, particularly embryological studies conducted in animals, greatly influenced the development of human anatomical nomenclature through comparative anatomy. There were obvious difficulties in relating terms to quadrupeds, animals that walk on four legs, who have abdominal and thoracic regions at the same level as opposed to human bipeds, in whom an upward and downward orientation might seem more obvious. In order to standardize nomenclature, anatomical terms relate to the standard anatomical position. When the human body is in the standard anatomical position, it is upright, erect on two legs, facing forward, with the arms at the sides each rotated so that the palms of the hands turn forward. In the standard anatomical position, superior means toward the head or the cranial end of the body. The term inferior means toward the feet or the caudal end of the body. The frontal surface of the body is the anterior or ventral surface of the body. Accordingly, the terms anteriorly and ventrally specify a position closer to or toward the frontal surface of the body. The back surface of the body is the posterior or dorsal surface, and the terms posteriorly and dorsally specify a position closer to or toward the posterior surface of the body. The terms superficial and deep relate to the distance from the exterior surface of the body. Cavities such as the thoracic cavity have internal and external regions that correspond to deep and superficial relationships in the mid-sagittal plane. Sutures fuse the bones of the skull, forming important anatomical landmarks. Sutures are joints that run jaggedly along the interface between the bones. At birth, the sutures are soft, broad, and cartilaginous. The sutures eventually fuse and become rigid and ossified near the end of puberty or early in adulthood. The sagittal suture unties the parietal bones of the skull along the midline of the body. The suture is used as an anatomical landmark in anatomical nomenclature to establish what are termed the sagittal planes of the body. The primary sagittal plane is the sagittal plane that runs through the length of the sagittal suture. Planes that are parallel to the sagittal plane but that are offset from the mid-sagittal plane are termed parasagittal planes. Sagittal planes run anteriorly and posteriorly and are always at right angles to the coronal planes. The medial plane, or mid-sagittal plane, divides the body vertically into superficially symmetrical right and left halves. The medial plane also establishes a centerline axis for the body. The terms medial and lateral refer to positions relative to the medial axis. If a structure is medial to another structure, the medial structure is closer to the medial or center axis. If a structure is lateral to another structure, the lateral structure is farther away from the medial axis. For example, the lungs are lateral to the heart. The coronal suture unites the frontal bone with the parietal bones. In anatomical nomenclature, the primary coronal plane designates the plane that runs through the length of the coronal suture. The primary coronal plane divides the body into frontal and back halves, which is why it is also termed the frontal plane. Planes that divide the body into superior and inferior portions and that are at right angles to both the sagittal and coronal planes are termed transverse planes. Oblique planes are anatomical planes that are not parallel to sagittal, coronal, or transverse planes. Additionally, the body is divided into several regional areas. The most superior area is the cephalic region, which includes the head. The thoracic region is commonly known as the chest region. Although the celiac region specifically refers to the center of the abdominal region, it is sometimes used to designate a wider area of abdominal structures. At the inferior end of the abdominal region lies the pelvic region, or pelvis. The posterior or dorsal side of the body has its own special regions, named for the underlying vertebrae. From superior to inferior along the midline of the dorsal surface lie the cervical, thoracic, lumbar, and sacral regions. The buttocks are the most prominent feature of the gluteal region. The term upper limbs or upper extremities refers to the arms. The term lower limbs or lower extremities refers to the legs. The proximal end of an extremity is at the junction of the extremity, i.e., arm or leg, with the trunk of the body. The distal end of an extremity is the point on the extremity farthest away from the trunk, e.g., fingers and toes. Accordingly, if a structure is proximate to another structure, it is closer to the trunk, e.g., the elbow is proximate to the wrist. If a structure is distal to another, it is farther from the trunk, e.g., the fingers are distal to the wrist. One can also describe structures as medial or lateral to the midline axis of each extremity. Within the upper limbs, the terms radial and ulnar may be used synonymously with lateral and medial. In the lower extremities, the terms fibular and tibial are synonymous with lateral and medial. Rotations of the extremities may be described as medial rotations, toward the midline, or lateral rotations, away from the midline. Many structural relationships are described by combined anatomical terms, e.g., the eyes are anterio-medial to the ears. Anatomical nomenclature also standardizes terms of movement. Starting from the anatomical position, abduction indicates the movement of an arm or leg away from the midline or mid-sagittal plane. Adduction indicates the movement of an extremity toward the midline. The opening of the hands into the anatomical position is supination of the hands. Rotation so the dorsal side of the hands faces forward is termed pronation. The term flexion means movement toward the flexor or anterior surface. On the other hand, extension generally refers to movement towards the extensor or posterior surface. The arm flexes when it brings the hand from the anatomical position toward the shoulder, a curl, or when it raises the arm over the head from the anatomical position. Extension returns the upper arm and/or lower arm to the anatomical position. Because of the embryological rotation of the lower limbs that rotates the primitive dorsal side to the adult ventral side, flexion occurs as the thigh is raised anteriorly and superiorly toward the anterior portion of the pelvis. Extension occurs when the thigh is returned to its anatomical position. Specifically, due to the embryological rotation, flexion of the lower leg occurs as the foot is raised toward the back of the thigh, and extension of the lower leg occurs with the kicking motion that returns the lower leg to anatomical position. The flexion side of the hand is referred to as the palmar surface, palm side. The bottom sole of the foot is referred to as the plantar surface. From the anatomical position, extension occurs when the toes are curled back and the foot arches upward, and flexion occurs as the foot is returned to the anatomical position. The foot performs rolling motions known as inversion, rolling with the big toe initially lifting upward, and eversion, rolling with the big toe initially moving downward. Summary. Human anatomy is a crucial aspect of modern medical education, focusing on the structure and function of the human body. Functional systems in the human body include cutaneous, muscular, skeletal, circulatory, nervous, digestive, urinary, endocrine, respiratory, and reproductive. The cutaneous system includes the skin, hair, and nails, which act as a barrier and regulate body temperature. Muscles in the muscular system enable movement and power, while the skeletal system provides support and is responsible for many physiological and immunological processes. The skeletal system includes the femur, ear ossicles, ligaments, joints, and tendons. The circulatory system includes the heart, arteries, veins, capillaries, blood, and blood-forming organs. The heart acts as a dual pump, pumping blood throughout the body and distributing it through the arteries and veins. Comparative anatomy, which identifies general structural patterns in plant and animal families, provides the basis for species classification. Overall, human anatomy is a vital aspect of modern medical education and research. The human body is a complex structure with various systems and structures. The nervous system, which includes the brain, spinal cord, and sensory organs, processes sensory information and performs cognitive thought. The digestive system is a long tube extending from the mouth to the anus, with primary glands in the stomach, liver, and pancreas. The urinary system consists of kidneys, bladders, and tubules, while the endocrine system consists of ductless glands that produce hormones. The respiratory system includes the lungs, diaphragm, and tubes that connect them to the outside atmosphere. The reproductive system enables sperm and egg to unite and develop into a functional human. Anatomical nomenclature has evolved over centuries, with terms like up or down having no meaning unless the orientation of the body is clear. Anatomical studies, particularly embryological studies, greatly influence the development of human anatomical nomenclature through comparative anatomy. Standard anatomical positions standardize nomenclature by specifying a position closer to the frontal and posterior surfaces using terms like anteriorly and ventrally, respectively. Sutures are joints that fuse the bones of the skull, forming important anatomical landmarks. They become rigid and ossified near the end of puberty or early in adulthood. The sagittal suture unties the parietal bones along the midline of the body, establishing the sagittal planes. The medial plane divides the body vertically into superficially symmetrical right and left halves. The primary coronal plane divides the body into the frontal and back halves, also known as the frontal plane. Several regional areas divide the body, including the cephalic region, thoracic region, celiac region, pelvic region, posterior or dorsal side, cervical, thoracic, lumbar, and sacral regions. The upper limbs refer to the arms, while the lower limbs refer to the legs. The proximal end of an extremity is at the junction of the extremity with the trunk of the body, while the distal end is the point on the extremity farthest away from the trunk. Structure relationships are often described in combined anatomical terms. Anatomical nomenclature also standardizes terms of movement, such as abduction, pronation, flexion, extension, and rolling motions. Supination of the hands, pronation, flexion, and extension are all important aspects of the structure. The palmar surface refers to the flexion side of the hand, while the plantar surface refers to the bottom sole of the foot. This content is mainly for the purpose of learning English vocabulary, English grammar, and English sentence structure. We are learning American English. Thank you for taking the time to watch. Thank you for considering subscribing to see more exciting videos.